أعوذ بالله من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم به نستعين. الحمد لله الذي جعل الحمد مفتاحا لذكره وسببا للمزيد من فضله ودليلا على آلائه وعظمته، ثم الصلاة والسلام على خير خلقه سيدنا ونبينا وحبيب قلوبنا أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد، اللهم صل على محمد وعلى آله الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين، لا سيما بقية الله في الأرضين، أرواحنا له فداء. أما بعد، فقد قال الله سبحانه وتعالى في كتابه الكريم: بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. إن الأبرار لفي نعيم على الأرائك ينظرون تعرف في وجوههم نظرة النعيم يسقون من رحيق مختوم ختامه مسك وفي ذلك فليتنافس المتنافسون. صدق الله العلي العظيم. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. First and foremost, I give my condolences to all of you on the occasion which we are commemorating. And this is the aftermath of the Shahada of Imam Hussein, his companions, and his Ahlul Bayt, alayhim salatu wasalam, and the imprisonment of Imam Zain al-Abidin and the women and children of Ahlul Bayt, alayhim salatu wasalam. Inshallah, in these next few days, we will discuss Sermon 32 of Nahjul Balagha. In this sermon, Imam Ali alayhi salatu wasalam, he outlines 4 different personality types. So inshallah, we want to discuss these personality types over the next few days. But it's important to understand that what is the purpose of personality types, and particularly because in several of our hadith from the Ahlul Bayt alayhim wasalam, we see that they divide people, an-nas ala arbata asnaf, for example, that people are of 4 types, or sometimes people are of 5 types, or 3 types. So the importance of studying this is to understand how to interact with people and individuals. Many different philosophers and great thinkers, they have outlined personality types. Sometimes they use it for literature as well, to when they write novels, different authors, they describe characters, and then they outline how these characters interact with other people. Likewise, personality types is often used in the corporate world as well. Myers-Briggs, for example, they've come up with a personality typology where they describe different individuals, their personality types, and they do so in order to understand how people function in a work setting. So when we look at Nahjul Balagha, Imam Ali alayhi wasallam in Sermon 32, his framework is completely different. Of course, Myers-Briggs, they're concerned with, how well can we make the capitalist system function and work? Imam Ali alayhi wasallam, on the other hand, he's more concerned with the divine system, with a divine law and divine governance. That how are people interacting within that framework? So we're dealing with 2 different frameworks. Nonetheless, we can make use of different terminologies that are used in the Myers-Briggs, because most people in the West are familiar with that terminology or what is stated. And this will also help us to understand Nahjul Balagha as well. Quite often, we read Nahjul Balagha and may not understand Nahjul Balagha, or read it and many people do not understand how the statements that Imam Ali alayhi are making can be contextualized in our own situation. How do we understand it for our own life and implement it in our own life? So inshallah, we will try to discuss that in order to better understand history, what was happening, and we understand those personality types that existed in history during the time of Imam Ali, and in fact also still exist today. This topic of personality types is also a very important topic because it helps us to even understand ourselves and to perhaps avoid certain personality types or embrace certain personalities or embrace certain characteristics. So when we look at the Nahjul Balagha, Sermon 32, Imam Ali alayhi he begins by setting the framework of what he's speaking about. He says, Ya ayyuhan nas, inna qad asbahna fi dahrin unudin wa zamanin kunudin. He says that, oh people, we are living in a time where there's a lot of wrong that is being done. And there's ungratefulness, that people are ungrateful for what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us, all of the blessings, all of the ni'mah that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is giving us. That our life, our livelihood, our families, our governance, the guidance from Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, the guidance from Ahlul Bayt alayhim afdalus wasalam. So Imam Ali, he's saying this is the framework in which we are living. And that is something that we even see today, that when we look at our lives and what exists around us, it's all because of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And by not establishing justice and by not interacting with one another the way that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He wants us to interact with one another, then that is a sign of ungratefulness on behalf of mankind. Thereafter, Imam Ali alayhi he outlines 4 personality types. He starts with the passive-aggressive person, and we'll go into more details about the characteristics of these personality types. But the way Imam Ali, he lists them in this sermon, he starts with the passive-aggressive, and a general description of this person is a person who has no influence, have no political or social political influence. However, there's an underlying desire to have power. There's an underlying desire to rise up and to lead. But at the moment, they have no influence. Then you have the aggressive personality. Imam Ali, in short, he states that this is the person who sells his hereafter for this world, because their focus is on worldly gain and power, and not necessarily on the hereafter and what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has in store for them if they were righteous people, if they were people who followed the path that was laid out for them in the Quran and the path that was shown to them by Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. The third category and group that Imam Ali alayhi he points out is the opportunist. The opportunist is also kind of a passive-aggressive personality that gives the appearance of being pious. However, there's no piety in their action. They're just taking advantage of a situation, and as we will describe a little bit later in more detail, that they are appearing to use, or they're using religion, but for a worldly gain. So they're opportunistic in this situation, or in what we understand to be the Islamic government and the Islamic society. That is the social political context in which Imam Ali alayhi is addressing and outlining these personality types. The fourth and final personality type that Imam Ali alayhi salatu wasalam, he points out is the one that is impartial, or you could say the dissembler. A person or personality type which is non-committal, which is also a type of passive individual, passive types, one who gives also a false appearance, as Imam Ali alayhi salatu wasalam describes. So inshallah, in this first lecture, I want to start with the aggressive personality. Although Imam Ali and in the Nahjul Balagha in Sermon 32, and inshallah, you will all read this sermon, he begins with the passive aggressive. But I want to start with the aggressive and then go to the passive aggressive personality. So with regards to the aggressive personality, Imam Ali, he starts it that this is the one who openly draws his sword. But what type of personality is this? If we go to that, the Breyer or the Meyer-Briggs typology of personality, it helps us to understand this aggressive personality. The closest match that they have is one who is an extrovert, who's intuitive, thinking, and judging. Meaning that this person who is aggressive has all of these qualities. They are an outgoing person, kind of an exuberant personality, someone who thinks, someone who judges others and judges their situation, someone who has a bit of intuition about things. When we dig deeper into that, the qualities of such a person, Myers and Briggs, they say that this is a person who wants control, because they think that having control of things and having control of their situation, having control of things around them, it gives them comfort. So they're often blunt and provocative. These people, they love strategizing, hence they are thinkers, because they're trying to strategize how they can gain control. Often these are ambitious people. They're motivated by money or wealth and power. So Meyer and Briggs, they point out, at least in the capitalistic system, these are folks who often rise to leadership positions in companies. They're often the CEOs, right? Because they're ambitious. They have strategy. You know, they're motivated by having control and organizing and leading others. So this personality type, yes, it can be a good type if it's put in its right, has the right values. As we see, yes, there's nothing wrong with being a CEO of a company, leading a company. Leadership is not bad. But if the right principles are not coupled with this personality, then yes, it could be a bad or harmful personality. As Imam Ali alayhi salatu wasalam, he points out in the Nahjul Balagha, which we will come to discuss. One of the shortcomings also of this personality type, the aggressive personality type, and Meyer and Briggs, they don't call it the aggressive personality type. They just simply say the person who is an extrovert, intuitive, has intuition, is thinking and judging. The aggressive is what I have understood from the statement of Imam Ali alayhi wasallam, and the Meyer-Briggs personality of the extrovert with these other characteristics and traits kind of coincides with that. One of the shortcomings that Myers-Briggs speaks about the extrovert who's intuitive and thinking and judging. Says that sometimes they have a inferior inward looking position, meaning that they are weak introverts. They often do not reflect upon themselves, nor do they consider their feelings or other people's feelings. So this is perhaps one of their weaknesses, as we can see, a weak trait. Although within the corporate world, it is considered to be strong, because Myers-Briggs says, oh, these people, they make very strong and courageous leaders. Although in that personality type, their leadership skills, as Myers-Briggs points out, it says that they speak before they listen, and they judge before they perceive. So while they don't listen to others, they just simply make their decision and they move forward. They are not concerned with perceiving how others feel, and they move forward. And that's based on a worldly and not a metaphysical outlook of things. And that's why Imam Ali alayhi in Sermon 32 of Nahjul Balagha, when he speaks about this personality type, it's not spoken about in a positive light. That these personalities, these four personalities that Imam Ali alayhi he points out, he is pointing them out so that the audience, or those who he's speaking to, of course, those folks who were in Masjid al-Kufa when he delivered this sermon, and also ourselves, that we have to be careful of this personality type. On one hand, not adopt these traits and characteristics, and on the other, to be aware of people who have such personality traits and understand how to deal with them. So Imam Ali alayhi he points them out. He says, and gives their traits and characteristics. He says, these are people who they draw their swords. They're quick to draw their swords. And the sword is not necessarily a physical sword or a literal sword. It could refer to their cunning position, that how they are deceptive, how they are cunning individuals. He says that they openly commit mischief, and they collect their horsemen and footmen. In other words, they gather people around them. They are leading other people, and they drive people and steer people in their own direction. These people, or this personality type, he says that they have devoted themselves to securing wealth, leading troops, rising on the pulpit. In other words, being the center of attraction, being the center of attention of other people, coaching others, wanting others to listen to them. And what Imam Ali alayhi also points out about them, he says, these are the people who have allowed their faith to perish. In other words, they have cared nothing about the deen. They have cared nothing about the deen. Meaning in their actions, in their positioning, in their leadership, the principles that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has outlined in the Quran are not relevant to them. The principles that are seen in the ethos of Rasulullah, the actions and the sirat of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, also are not important to them. And this is why Imam Ali, he ends that description of them. He says, وَلَبِئْسَ الْمَتْجَرُ أَن تَرَى الدُّنْيَا لِنَفْسِكَ ثَمَنًا وَمِمَّا لَكَ عِنَّ اللَّهِ عِوَضًا. So he says, this is the worst type of transaction that a person can do. That you will allow the dunya to be the price of your soul. And this is in exchange for what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He has with Him. So instead of acting and living by those principles which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has outlined in the Quran, acting and living by those principles that we see in the lifestyle of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that the whole focus is on this dunya, and that is the price that of one's soul. So who is this personality in the time of Amir al-Mu'mineen Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi wasallam? Because one thing you have to realize is that Imam Ali alayhi wasallam is not speaking in a void. When he's delivering the sermons in Masjid al-Kufa, when he's delivering the sermons in Kufa, anywhere in Kufa, or he's making these statements, it is all historically relevant. It is not in a void and not speaking or addressing these personality types that are in the Muslim world at that time. So perhaps as we study Nahjul Balagha itself and we cross-reference these sermons of Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi wasalam, we see that this personality type is perhaps most exemplified in Muawiyah. If we go to Sermon 200 of Nahjul Balagha, Imam Ali alayhi he addresses Muawiyah. And in that sermon he begins, Wallahi ma Muawiyatu bi'adha minni walakinnahu yaghdiru wa yafjur. Imam Ali, he begins that sermon, he says, I swear by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that Muawiyah is not more cunning or not more clever than I am. He says, the only thing is that he is someone who is deceiving and he commits bad evil deeds, according to the translation. That yaghdiru wa yafjur, meaning that in his wittiness, in his cleverness, that is not based upon the principles that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has set down in the Quran. It's not based upon the seerat of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. He says, وَلَوْلَا كَرَاهِيَّةُ الْغَدْرِ لَكُنْتُ مِنْ أَدْهَى النَّاسِ. And if it wasn't for this deceit, and if it wasn't that deceit is reprehensive, it is despised by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he says, then I would have been the most clever of people. So Imam Ali alayhi salam, that he is speaking from a position or a principled position. But yes, there's not an issue with, you could say, having or competition between yourself and others, competing for a position, even if we put it in this sense and terms, competing for a position, competing for something that is good and something that is based on the principles of the Quran, based on the principles by which Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam lived by. Not competing and making or having the dunya as your reward for that competition, for the gain of power, the gain of position. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in Surah Al-Mutaffifin, this is one of the good examples of that, to show that yes, the believers should be competing with themselves and should be competing with others, but that competition should be based upon righteousness. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he states, إِنَّ الْأَبْرَارَ لَفِي نَعِيمٍ عَلَى الْأَرَائِكِ يَنْظُرُونَ تعرف في وجوههم نظرة النعيم يسقون من الرحيق المختوم ختامه مسك وفي ذلك فليتنافس المتنافسون. This is the verse I recited in the beginning of Surah, which is Surah Al-Mutaffifin, chapter 83 of the Quran, from verses 22 to 26, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, indeed the righteous will be in paradise. And this is after the mu'mineen, they have competed with one another, they have strived between one another. He says they will be in paradise. And while sitting on their thrones and looking at the scene in paradise, watching what is happening in paradise, and you will recognize the glory of bliss upon their face. They will be, again, served with pure wine, pure drink in paradise. And there will be a scent of musk, a very beautiful and fragrant scent that is around them. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that it is this bliss, meaning paradise, for which they aspired for and they were competing with one another in. And this is how the competition in this world should be. So let's say, for example, because this also, it often happens, especially when we look at I would say masjid politics at times. This is a good example. So sometimes you may find the competition. So one person is running for president, another person is running for president. And having that position should not be based simply on, well, I want to lead others. if that competition is to be in a position of leadership in order to safeguard the deen, in order to safeguard the masjid, in order to safeguard the principles by which the Prophet of Allah and the Ahlul Bayt alayhim afsalatu wasalam lived upon, then alhamdulillah. If that competition continues, simply, I should be the leader, then that is not the principles in which the Quran has set forth for us. Those are not the principles that we see in the lifestyle of Rasulullah, in the lifestyle of the Ahlul Bayt alayhim afsalatu wasalam. That is not the principle for which Imam Hussein alayhi afsalatu wasalam rose up against Yazid. It was not to gain a political position. It was not in order to simply put Yazid down, just simply to put him down. What was at stake was the deen, was Islam. Yazid openly disobeyed Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And for him to be the example for the ummah is what made Imam Hussein alayhi salatu wasalam. He says that if people accept this type of leadership, wa ala al-Islam as-salam, then you could say goodbye to Islam. So that competition or vying for what one could say is leadership, or to stand up and come out in the front, as long as it's based on righteous principles, there's no problem with that. If we look at Sahih Bukhari and Sahih Muslim, there's a very interesting hadith there where the Prophet of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he is reported to have stated that with regards to his ummah, he says that ma akhafu alaykum an tushriku ba'di. He says, I don't fear that my ummah or these folks in Hijaz, that you would turn back to polytheism, that you go back to worshiping idols after me. So this is not my fear. وَلَكِنْ أَخَافُ عَلَيْكُمْ أَن تَتَنَافَسُوا فِيهَا. He says, however, I fear that you will compete with one another for worldly gain, only for worldly affairs. And this is unfortunately what was set up after Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. That when the rightful leader of the Ummah, Amir al-Mu'mineen, Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi wasalam, was set aside, his political position was usurped. It was all for dunya, not necessarily to lead the Ummah based on the principles of the Quran and based on the principles of the lifestyle of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And that led to what turned out to be the shahadat of Imam Hussein. Those principles by which the Khilafah rose up after Rasulullah were not Quranic, were not righteous, and it culminated into a very despicable and sad event of Karbala. And thereafter the imprisonment of Imam Zayn al-Abidin, the women, the household of Rasulullah, the children, the offspring of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, simply for worldly gain. When Imam Hussein alayhi wasallam, he gathered his family, his companions, and he went forth, as he stated, لِإِصْلَاحِ أُمَّةِ جَدِّ Rasulullah, in order to correct the ills of the ummah, of the nation, of his grandfather. He did so on the plains of Karbala, and this was the last son and direct son of Fatima Zahra salamullah alayha, as Imam Hussein on the plains of Karbala before his shahada, he mentioned this. He says, am I not the son of the daughter of Rasulullah? I'm the last of the sons of the daughters of Fatima Zahra. I'm the last of the people of Ahl Kisa. But yet still they martyred Imam Hussein. They martyred Imam Hussein and they placed his head upon the spear. One of the sad but beautiful poems about this event, about what happened in Karbala, is in one poem where the author, he wrote, يا فاطمة الزهراء يا كمي وانظري أو فاطمة أو زهراء كمسي وجه الحسين له السعيد مصافح. Come see the face of Hussein, the trembling face of Hussein. When did the face of Imam Hussein tremble? Was it when the Shuhada went forth on the plains of Karbala? When he went forth to become a martyr? Was it when Muslim ibn Awsaja or Habib ibn Mudahir or Zahir ibn Qayn? Was it when they were struck down on the plain of Karbala? Or did Imam Hussein, was he trembling when he sent his son forth, Ali al-Akbar, who looked most like Rasulullah, who sounded most like Rasulullah, and that whenever the family, they wanted to remind themselves of Rasulullah, they would talk to Ali al-Akbar? Was it this the moment when Imam Hussein, he was shaking? Or was it when the moment when Abu al-Fadl Abbas, he went onto the plains of Karbala and he was martyred? He called out to Imam Hussein, Ya akhi, adaraka akhak, oh my brother, come and help your brother. That when Abu al-Fadl Abbas was martyred and Imam Hussein had no more support, was this the moment that Imam Hussein began to tremble? Oh Zahra, oh Fatima, come see the face of Hussein on the plains of Karbala. Akafanuhu nasjul ghubari wa ghusluhu bidam al-warid. That look what happened to your Hussein, O Fatima Zahra, that his kafan, his burial thobes became the dirt on the plains of Karbala, and his ghusl was with the blood that was flowing from his jugular veins. Akafanuhu nasjul ghubari wa ghusluhu bidam al-warid walam tanahu nawaihu. That Imam Hussein, when he was martyred on the plains of Karbala, like all of the Shuhada, for 3 days their bodies were there unburied, and there was no one coming to visit those graves, those martyrs. وعلى السنان رافع رأسي. The heads of Imam Hussein, the head of Imam Hussein, the heads of the Shuhada were placed on spears. ولجسمه خيل العدات روامح. And if you looked at the body of Imam Hussein, O Fatima Zahra, you will see that his body, it had been trampled by the horses. It had been trampled by the horses, and it was full of spears. This is how the Hussein of Fatima Zahra, he was martyred on the plains of Karbala. Inna lillahi وإنا إليه راجعون وسيعلم الذين ظلموا أي منقلب ينقلبون. اللهم بحق هذا المجلس الحسيني اغفر ذنوبنا واستر عيوبنا وقضي حوائجنا واشفي مرضانا وارحم أمواتنا وعجل فرج مولانا صاحب العصر والزمان من أعوانه وأنصاره والمستشهدين بين يديه وتحت لوائه بحق محمد وآله الطاهرين. ماطم حسين.